today's Nancy's Corner guest is a storyteller who is drawn to small town life and has a penchant for quilting. When she combined those three interests, she became a New York Times best-selling author. I'd like you to welcome Marie Bostwick to Sewing with Nancy, a novelist and who's going to share with you some of her stories and how she began. Welcome, Marie.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here, Nancy.
You've been on my radar screen for a long time to be included in this interview section because I always find it fascinating how writers begin their career, and especially when they incorporate my love of sewing and quilting. Give our viewers a little preview.
Well, people often ask what came first, the writing or the quilting. The writing came first. I was writing almost as soon as I could pick up a pen. You know, when I was a little girl, that was my idea of fun, was to hang out in the basement and write stories.
Wow.
So I didn't really, though, know where it would take me. And when I was, you know, kind of a grown-up in my 30s, I went on a vacation where there was a writer's workshop, and the teacher later pulled me aside and said, "Oh, well, you're a writer. What have you published?" Which seemed crazy to me because I just, at that point, was writing grocery lists in my mind. I had little kids at home. But he encouraged me, and I did start writing seriously, and really it took about 10 years before my first novel was published.
Now, you're on novel number 11.
Yes, ma'am.
And so the second sister is what we're going to talk about today and how this story ties quilting into the mystery of it all. So there's Lucy and there's
Alice. Yes. Lucy is a kind of hard-bitten, ambitious, but loving political operative who has to go home during a family tragedy. And there she discovers something very secret in the old family home, a trunk full of quilts made by her sister Alice. And they all have one inscription on the back, "To Maeve." And they are made over 18 years, one quilt every year, but nobody knows exactly who Maeve is. So during this story...
Alice passed away.
And Alice passes away, very sadly. But during the story, you know, Lucy really finds out a lot about herself and what she wants out of life, but she also rediscovers her sister and the town she grew up in.
And this character made a quilt every year for 18 years, and her quilting kind of grew as her life changed.
Yes, it's true. And you know, I think those of us who've been quilting for a long time, I've been quilting for 25 years, they're definitely better now than they were 25 years ago.
I can attest to that as well. And you're also drawn to small towns.
I am.
You don't necessarily live in one.
I actually do live in a very small town in Connecticut, but I travel a lot.
Okay.
So, but I love that a town is almost a character within itself. That's always the case in my books.
So when you are writing, you know, I write a lot, but it's how-to sewing books. I have definitely a plan, but when you're writing, how does a theme come to you?
You know, I don't usually actually begin with a theme. I just write the story, but it is interesting that when the book is done, themes have emerged. I don't even know what they are usually until about a month after I finished writing, but clearly there were things on my mind once the book is finished.
And so you have characters you have thought of, and then you kind of put in that small town flavor, and you incorporate always a little quilting.
Almost always, but you know, the books really aren't about quilting.
No,
the
they're
books
not,
are about the relationships between the characters, and really probably half of my readers can't even thread a needle.
And that's fine, but what I think is fascinating is that it brings quilting to people who are not quilters.
Yes, so many people have written to me after they've read one of my books and said, "I want to learn to quilt," and very often I will drop everything and find their nearest quilt shop and tell them that they should call and say, "I want to learn to quilt," and they will have 9 new best friends.
Oh, they certainly will. Isn't that something?
It's so true.
You know, when we survey our readers, there are 2 common hobbies. Number 1, flower gardening. Number 2, reading.
Yep, absolutely.
So this kind of combines, you know, a combination of things in the second sister. And you're working on a new book.
I am. I'm going back to Texas. I wrote a book called Between Heaven and Texas, and I'm writing a sequel right now. I don't have a title for it, but it's a beloved character of mine, Mary Templeton, who in fact happens to have a quilting television show.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
And does she do interviews on her television?
She mostly does a lot of quilting. She has her son Howard helps pick the fabrics for her quilts, because while Mary Dell is a wonderful quilter, she has no taste whatsoever.
Well, I think she needs to use Tammy Bowser's value tool finder. What do you think?
That would be a really good idea, yes.
We just showed how that worked. Well, it's interesting, Marie, how you've incorporated your love of writing, your love of small towns, and some of our hobbies and interests in that as well. So thank you for being our guest.
Thanks so much for having me, Nancy. It's been fun.
You're welcome. Well, and thank you for joining us during this first program of How to Sew Art. Tammy Bowser will be back next time for our second episode, and we will be working with the fabric and the pattern, and then all the magic happens. You can watch this program again at nancyzeman.com and learn more all about Sewing with Nancy. Bye for now.